So I decided to put this particular video on this channel because, it's not really about vaping. It's really to speak to the few subscribers that I have on this channel. So an exclusive channel, and only the ones that I would prefer to be on this channel. And so I'm going to speak, and these types of issues can very well wind up on this channel. So I thought, well, this would be perfect to speak to the warrant that went out to Derek. I can't do his last name. Chauvin. He is the defendant in regards to George Floyd's death. And so I thought I'd like to speak to this because it's rather interesting the way the special agent and the prosecuting attorney, as well as the district attorney, it's rather interesting how they wrote the complaint. I was a bit taken aback by it. It's almost like a free pass, unless they up the ante. They could certainly file more charges. They don't have the, they have a partial medical autopsy on this on George Floyd, but they don't have the full coroner's or the full medical autopsy yet. So maybe then they might up the charges, who knows? But if you read it for what it is, I mean, Derek is going to do some time in prison, but the way they wrote this particular complaint or warrant, he may not get as many years as he ought to in this particular case. To a layman that is to a regular, Jane or Joe like ourselves. From the point of the court itself, it's, they might be playing politics to a degree. And not only that, this is the reason why they issued this complaint or the warrant is probably to try anyway to quell all the riots and the protests. But if you really read it for what it is, it really is going to do the opposite effect. I mean, you're going to inflame the individuals that partake in a protest or these riots and things of that nature. They actually had in Oakland, I believe it was Oakland, I can't remember if it's California or New York, one of the two. They had a federal, police officer that was actually fatally shot. I think it was either early today on Saturday or yesterday on Friday. So this is getting pretty crazy out there. I have absolutely no problem with a peaceful protest. There's ways to do that in a very organized way to get your point across. I mean, you could shut down entire businesses and you could have not only a protest, you can have a boycott. You could shut down entire cities just through a peaceful protest. I don't quite agree with all the burning of the cities or looting and all that other crap, vandalizing. But I certainly can understand if you have a peaceful protest. I mean, if it's done in a very organized manner, you could shut down an entire state. In fact, probably shut down the entire United States and its territories if it's done in a very organized manner. Because the key to it all is if, for one thing, you're supposed to have a permit to protest, okay? But because the way it is, these individuals are not, even if they're organized, they're not going to get a permit to protest. They're just really irrelevant. So when you put that to the side, if they're very organized in their protesting, they could do it in a way that it can close down the country, the government. They can close the government down. You know, I mean, for instance, if you had, 10,000, 100,000, a million protesters surround the entire White House, not saying you ought to, but this is one way you can do it. Surround the entire White House, that's as far as the land is concerned, legally speaking, that is on the outside of the barricades or the outside of the barriers, on the outside of the fencing, and as long as you know your parameter, as long as you know the border, so to speak, of the White House, as far as there's certain areas where you can't step on, where you can get arrested just for stepping on it. But if you do a protest outside, just right outside the parameter of the White House, and put 100,000 people around the White House, they could shut the White House down. I mean, of course, Trump or his associates will certainly get a helicopter and go up. They probably also might be able to go through the tunnels that's under the White House and drive through and get around those protesters. But the point is you could surround the White House and literally shut down any kind of traffic to the White House. Now, of course, you have to be careful to a degree, because if you shut down one of the roadways that lead to, let's say, one of the gates that goes onto the White House property, and they tell you to move out of the way, you need to move out of the way. But you could certainly slow down that process. Let's say, for instance, and this is all legal stuff, this is illegal. Let's say you put 50,000 individuals on one road that has a lot of traffic into the White House, meaning vehicles and things of that nature. You put 50,000 individuals on that one road. Well, by the time the Trump and the national, the Army or the Pentagon or any of these characters, Secret Service, by the time they get through telling all those individuals to disperse or to break away from that roadway, it'll take them hours, if not days. So that's one way, a perfect way to do something like that. If you understand how the White House is structured, that is, the roadways that go onto the White House properties. The same with the U.S. Capitol, or even your own state capitals, your city municipalities. And this is all legal stuff. As long as, let's say, for a perfect example, in Minneapolis, around the mayor's, and he seems like a nice guy, Mayor Frey, either Fry or Frey, F-R-E-Y. He seems like a nice guy, but he's way over his head on this stuff here. But anyway, I mean, he really has this very open-minded type of let's work things out kind of attitude, and it's just not going to work under these circumstances, unfortunately. It has nothing to do with being Democrat or Republican, Trump's politicizing it. It has to do with, if you watch the mayor of Minneapolis, you could see his character is to be a good guy, and he doesn't want any ulcers. He wants to be, everything calm, try to work things out. But that's just not going to happen. This is well over his head. But anyway, but still, nevertheless, let's say the mayor's official municipality, they could put 100,000 Minneapolisans, I guess, those individuals that live there, or even those that are outside of the state or out of the county or out of the city, doesn't matter. We're allowed to cross the state borders, as far as I know. It's scary thinking if they can't. But anyway, and surround the entire mayor's office and shut down those roadways to the mayor. The only way in is, well, a helicopter. In other words, if you put 100,000 people around the mayor's office, by the time the National Guard, the state National Guard, Minnesota's National Guard, disperses all those people, I mean, it'll take hours, if not days. And you'll get your point across. You can not only do it with the governmental buildings, you can do it with banks or with particular commercial buildings that are targeted, that you want to slow down, targeted in a way that not any violence or any physical altercations and things of that nature. But you could put, let's say, Chase Manhattan Bank. There was a city, I can't remember where, that I read. They set it on fire. Instead of setting it on fire, they should have 10,000 people around this Chase Manhattan Bank from Monday through Friday. That will definitely slow down any kind of money exchanges going on with the Chase Manhattan Bank, that is any particular property that is targeted, or you know, and so there, if it's organized properly, you can get a lot of you can have a serious amount of persuasion, and those that are not participating in these particular protests or marches or whatever you want to call them, will actually, as an American for the most part, especially after seeing that George Floyd video, would probably either turn a deaf ear to it or support it, because they're acting appropriately, and they're doing it peacefully, and there's no issues. They might be a little mad that they can't get to the bank to withdraw some money, but outside of that, the social justice or the message that is conveyed while doing that particular protest around a bank or a grocery store or whatever individuals decide to target, would be an inconvenience for other Americans, but the social justice aspect of it ought to outweigh that particular inconvenience. So there are a lot of ways to go about it as Americans, you know, and you don't necessarily have to be black. I mean, a black person's a black, a white's a white, you know, Irish, Jewish, Italian, whatever, Polish, Spanish, whatever, you know, French. I mean, there's too many of their names. There's so many of them. You don't necessarily have to consider yourself as a nationality or a race or any of that. Just consider yourself as an American. And under the First Amendment, you're allowed to peacefully congregate and protest. So my preference for these particular leaders and whatever they're doing with these particular, you know, cities or states or whatever have you, is to organize and do what I'm saying. And you'll find that the government will listen to you. Not only the government, but the businesses will listen. They will listen. I mean, that's the best way to go about it. That's the patriotic way of going about it. I mean, like if I was involved, which I'm not, but if I was involved, that's how I would say to all those, well, probably millions now, but you know, not high number of millions, but I'm sure it's more than 1 million that are protesting in various cities and states. That's the message I would convey to what I just explained. And that's really the ultimate way of getting your message heard by the government, by business, and you can actually begin that process of discourse to correct these situations. But if you go out there and commit violence and shoot police officers and you vandalize and commit arson, arson and robbery and killings or whatever. No, no, because the funny thing about it is, unfortunately, it's not really funny, but the reality of it all is that these days, I mean, like if you take it back, let's say 150 years ago, maybe 200 years ago, yeah, it was more like one-on-one. You might possibly get hit by a cannonball. You could get hit by a cannonball that may take out maybe 5 or 10 people, maybe, at the most. But that's about all you had 200 years ago. You understand? Today, if Trump has a serious bug up his rear end, not that he will do this, but he may do this. He could. Who knows? He's usually about 5,000 or 6,000 rungs off his head, meaning he's not all there at times. That is, he might order some F-16s, right? Or F-15s. Not that they will do that, but they could. They could. I mean, if it depends on how violent the situation gets and how out of control it gets. They could send in tanks. Yeah, absolutely. They could send in, like he's saying, Trump is saying, well, we're going to send the military in. Yeah, don't mess with the military. They're bad boys. They know what they're doing. They'll take care of the matter. No. So there's no, it's like, you could have 20 million or 50 million protesters around the United States and its territories. What are the chances of going up against a military tank? What is the chances of going up against an F-15 or 16? I think it's 15, up against a F-15. See, it's much different than 200 years ago. Much different than 200 years ago. It's not like on a one-on-one kind of thing. I mean, they shoot something from the F-15, it's going to wipe out about 100 people at once, maybe more, probably more. A tank will probably take out 100 people as well. It's much different, dependent upon how the situation escalates. And the government will determine how much force will be used in regards to that escalated protest or escalated activity. So to think to yourself, well, I'm going to go loot and vandalize and burn cities down and buildings and governmental properties and things of that nature, eventually the government's going to up the ante and they're going to send in the tanks. And they very well could, it's a remote possibility, but they could very well send in the F-15s. First, they'll probably just send in the tanks. I mean, if you want to, let's say there's, I don't know, let's say there's 500 people on a road and you see a tank coming at you, and that tank is going, probably ordered to go extremely slow, probably 2 miles per hour, but you still see it come at you, you're going to get out of the way. I mean, what possible tool can you use to destroy a tank? Unless you have another tank. And the Americans, as far as I know, don't own tanks. See, so if you understand that problem there, that issue there, this is the reason why, unless it de-escalates and continues to escalate, you wind up in that kind of situation, and that can be extremely nasty. Okay, whereas if you organize peacefully, but you do it very strategically, you don't turn into like the Weather Underground of the 1960s and early 70s or mid 70s. Actually, I should say throughout the 70s. And bomb buildings and all that other crap. But if you do it peacefully, but you organize, you still get the message across, you still get the point across, but you do it strategically and do it peacefully in a very organized manner. The government will listen. In fact, the government and the businesses will listen to you more by doing it peacefully in a very strategic manner than going in there and rioting and burning down buildings and killing people. No. You're not going to get the sympathies of all the mothers and fathers out there. The main goal you ought to have anyway, is to get the point across that the George Floyd situation is terrible, is downright terrible, and therefore to get the sympathies, not only the empathies, but the sympathies of the general public in regards to mothers and fathers across all the races and nationalities and creeds and whatever else have you. And once you're able to accomplish that, then you have a serious movement that the government and no business can put asunder. But you got to do it smart. This stuff going on right now, eventually, Trump can't wait. Believe me, Trump can't wait to send in the military. He's going to have a field day. He's going to be twittering away. If Twitter lets him. No, he's going to be twittering away as the military goes in there. Like I said, you're going down with 50,000 people strong on the road. You think, yeah, we're strong. And then all of a sudden you see 10 military tanks coming your way. What are you going to do? It's not going to be like what is that place called? Tiananmen Square over there. It was in China, was it, or Japan or something? It's China. Where one Asian guy got up on top of the tank and protested. No, it's not going to happen that way. You have 10 tanks or maybe more coming at you. And if you don't get it out of the way, especially if you're trying to throw cocktails and rocks and things of that nature at tanks, those tanks can very well run you over. It's not like getting ran over on your foot by a bicycle. This is a tank. I don't even know how much they weigh. That alone can do serious damage. So you don't want to ever get to that escalation. In other words, what I'm saying is that it ever escalated where Trump sends in the military, then it's over. This whole protest movement or whatever have you, movements, is over because they will literally squash it. They'll put it completely down, this quote unquote insurrection, because the way the government looks at it, especially the federal government, is it's an insurrection. And an insurrection, unfortunately, the United States Congress passed this over 100 years ago. An insurrection is actually a federal crime. Yeah. So you have to be very careful what you do. So it gives the power, the legal power for Trump as the military leader, commander in chief, to tell the military to do whatever is necessary to de-escalate the situation. And if that comes to that point, by law, by federal law, they can go in there and just put the entire thing down, state by state, city by city. And then you lose your point. What's the point? Eventually, they just silence you. But if you're organized and strategic about it, then the discussion or the discourse can begin. And that's really the key to it all, really, is to have a discourse, not only with the government, but also with businesses or any kind of grievance you may have. I remember in the 90s when I used to union organize, that the main point of that whole situation when you union organize is to get the people to the table. Yeah, that's all it's about. People think it's about numbers, it's about, it's about health and justice and fair play and things of that nature. Don't get me wrong. But the key of it all is to get each side, the business and the union officials, to the table. That's the key. So you can begin the process of discussion, discourse, and then working out your differences. And hopefully it's equitable as well as fair. That's the whole point of that kind of situation. And that's the type of situation you need in these kinds of circumstances that's going on with the George Floyd aftermath, I guess I could call it. So anyway, let me read this warrant complaint to you, and then I'll let you guys go. But this is just exclusively for this channel because, well, you know, it belongs here. It belongs to the intellectuals. So anyway, so the state of Minnesota, a county of Hennepin, I guess, district court, 4th Judicial District. So this is going to the judge as well, of course, and that's the prosecutor file number, court file number. And this is the guy's name, Derek Michael, I cannot do that name, Chauvin. It looks very French to me. He has French blood in him. How much of it, I have no clue. And I love the French, by the way. I don't like this guy, but I certainly love French culture and French arts. I love France. I always had a fantasy if I'm ever going to move anywhere, that's where I'm going. Or say France. That's my sort of, you know, all-time fantasy. And the date of birth and where he lives at, which probably he's not there. Even though it's heavily armed, he's probably somewhere else. I'm sure. Well, in jail probably, but until he has a court date. But to get out on bail, but and it's very high to get out on bail. But even if he gets out on bail, which he probably will, the chances of him being there will be very extreme low end. So this is the complaint submits this the complainant, meaning the prosecuting attorney, the special agent, and the district attorney. The complainant submits or the state, I should say, because like it'll say here, the state of Minnesota, okay. Mainly the people of the state of Minnesota. The complainant submits this complaint to the court and states that there is probable cause to believe defendant committed the following offenses. And defendant, of course, is, I'm going to just call him Derek. Okay, let me take a little vape here real quick. So count one is charged murder, 3rd degree. Perpetrating eminently dangerous act and evincing a depraved mind. This is rather interesting here. He was in his right state of mind. I called that one out. He definitely was not in his right state of mind. He can't necessarily plead insanity, that is Derek, but maybe emotional distress. Who knows what's going on, mental stress that was going through his head, which is actually sort of can be used as a defense in regards to Derek. So it's kind of strange the way they, so far, unless they up the charges, so far they're treating this police officer with kid gloves. As I go on, you'll see why. You can do 25 years, you know, he probably won't get that much, but he could. That's a maximum sentence that he could do. And the charge description is that on or about May 25th, 2020, and you see it, Derek Michael Bobone caused the death of George Floyd by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind without regard for human life. Well, definitely without regard for human life. That's an easy one, but still that can be used as a defense because it shows the state is saying that it could be that Derek had emotional mental distress. So they were a little bit lenient on charge one or count one. And then the other one is manslaughter, 2nd degree. That's the one I called out on. in the video on the Jacob Clare channel. That's what I thought. Could be this, or first degree, even second degree, but definitely manslaughter, But they might up it to first degree. It depends on his intent. But still, this is a biggie here as well. Culpable of negligence creating unreasonable risk. Yeah, because him being on Derek having his leg or knee on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds is unreasonable. That's what bothers me. Like if it was for maybe 15, 20 seconds, 30 seconds max, even though that's supposed to be outside of the protocol, it's 5 seconds. And then once you get the person in handcuffs, then you release the pressure on the person's neck. And he was in handcuffs, and he was resisting. We'll speak about it in a moment. And I spoke about that before, but it certainly did not give Derek a reason to do what he did. I mean, it's just like it says, creating unreasonable risk. It's unreasonable. Probably the thing is like on this thing here, he may get this particular count might actually work for him, but this is probably what's going to nail his ass. But unfortunately, he can only do 10 years in prison. He can get out maybe 4 years, maybe on good behavior, 4 to 6 years on good behavior, possibly 7. Still felony. He'll never work as a police officer again, at least not in the United States of America. In his territories, he might be able to go to a different country. Maybe they'll allow him to work as a police officer. But in the United States, he would never work as a police officer again if he's found, guilty of this particular charge or count. So you see it by creating an unreasonable risk and taking a chance of causing death or great bodily harm to George Floyd. And this is kind of weird too, taking a chance. Well, only a jury can decide this. But nevertheless, I don't think Derek was necessarily taking a chance. He put his ass down. He put George Floyd's ass down in place. And a lot of that could be anger, it could be even possibly rage, but mainly anger. Not so much rage, but anger. Could be racist, could be all kinds of different reasons as to what was going through his head for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Like I was saying, if he did it, even though it's outside of the police protocol, maybe up to 30 seconds, and even that is too much, but still, okay, 30 seconds tops, right? But 8 minutes, what? That to me is extremely unreasonable. 8 minutes, you count the time, that goes on for a while. To have someone's thing on your neck, and he's not like he's on a pillow or anything, on a cushion, or on even grass. Maybe if his head was on grass, on soil, little, maybe, possibly, unless it's really hard ground. But he was on a road. He was on tar, concrete, so to speak. That was hard. And of course, the defense attorneys are going to say he was not applying too much pressure against his neck. Of course, that's going to be raised. I can guarantee that. And coupled with what was said in this particular warrant or complaint, it can also be the defense attorney, whoever he hires. I'm sure he's going to hire a private defense attorney, will also use that information as well. But maybe the defense attorney will say, well, his leg or his knee was not too much pressure, so it couldn't have caused the death of, or helped contribute to the death of George Floyd. I mean, these are all defenses that are used by defense attorneys. They're there strictly to find every single angle they can to evade, I guess, or to get their client off, or not to have their client convicted. So anyway, so then it goes on, and I'm just going to read it, and every so often I'll talk to it, and we'll leave it at that. So you say on May 25th, 2020, someone called 911 and reported that a man bought merchandise from Cup Foods at, and you see it, with a counterfeit $20 bill. At 8:08 p.m., Minneapolis Police Department officers Thomas Lane and J.A. Kuang, I don't know, whatever, arrived with their body-worn cameras activated and running. See, and that's the other thing. We don't see that. You know, that would be released maybe sporadically from the police department, possibly, unless it burns in that particular police station. That film could have burned there. I'm sure they made sure that evidence was taken out of that building before it burned to the ground. But anyway, and definitely you'll see it in the court trial itself. But we have yet to see what was recorded visually, as well as, because it's not only visual, which will also get the audio from the police themselves. So it might show other angles as to what was going on. Anyway, the officers learned from store personnel that the man who passed the counterfeit $20 bill was $20 was parked in a car around the corner from a store on 38th Street. The BWC video obtained by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension shows that the officers approached the car, laying on the driver's side and carrying or whatever on the passenger side. And this is what I first initially saw, and then I saw that other video. 3 people were in the car. George Floyd was in the driver's seat, a known adult male was in the passenger seat, and a known adult female was sitting in the back seat. As Officer Lane began speaking with Mr. Floyd, he pulled his gun out and pointed it at Mr. Floyd's open window and directed Mr. Floyd to show his hands. When Mr. Floyd put his hands in the steering wheel, Lane put his gun back in his holster. So he didn't necessarily, Floyd didn't put his hands outside the window. He put it on through the steering wheel. And apparently Officer Lane saw that, and that's all that matters, because they want to see the hands, so the hands aren't reaching for guns or knives or whatever. That's mainly, of course, what that is all about. While Officer, I'm going to just call him K, was speaking with the front seat passenger, Officer Lane ordered Mr. Floyd out of the car, put his hands on Mr. Floyd, and pulled him out of the car. So, see, and that's what I saw initially in the first video was George Floyd was resistant. Absolutely, he was resistant at first, okay? Anyway, Officer Lane handcuffed Mr. Floyd. Mr. Floyd actively resisted being handcuffed. So you could see that on that. He wasn't too happy about the situation. Now, once handcuffed, Mr. Floyd became compliant, walked with Officer Lane to the sidewalk, and sat on the ground at Officer Lane's direction. And I saw that in that video. In a conversation that lasted just under 2 minutes, Officer Lane asked Mr. Floyd for his name and identification. Officer Lane asked Mr. Floyd if he was on anything, meaning drugs, and explained that he was arresting Mr. Floyd for passing counterfeit currency, the $20. Officers Kay and Lane stood Mr. Floyd up and attempted to walk Mr. Floyd to their squad car at 8:14 p.m. Mr. Floyd stiffened up, fell to the ground, and told the officer he was claustrophobic. Yeah. And you could see that initially from that particular video. Now, this is interesting here. This can be used. Yeah, I mean, this is serious stuff. That why they would, well, I guess they're trying to tell the truth. I don't know, but this can actually be used on behalf of the defense attorney. Because as we go on, in other words, Floyd is saying, I don't want to get into the police car because I'm claustrophobic, which really makes no sense because he just came out of his own car. When you're claustrophobic, you don't like to be in, small spaces, closed spaces. Now, the prosecution may make the argument, well, he's familiar with his own vehicle, and this is the reason why he has no problem in his own vehicle. But to be in someone else's vehicle, especially a police car, then he gets these types of claustrophobic, these fears and emotions and things of that nature, okay? Excited mindsets and stuff. In a way, this can work for the prosecution, but very, very well, very solidified, can very much work for the defense attorney. As I read on, you understand why. So it says then officers Derek, the defendant, and TT, I'm going to call him, some of these Asian names, forget it, and then arrived in a separate squad car. And you could see that because when that's where that other visual comes into play, and that others, where Derek pulled in, he pulled, I guess, in front of that other police car. You can sort of see that on the video. The officers made several attempts to get Mr. Floyd in the back seat of squad 320 from the driver's side. Mr. Floyd did not voluntarily get in the car and struggled with the officers by intentionally falling down, saying he was not going in the car and refusing to stand still. Mr. Floyd is over 6 feet tall and weighs more than 200 pounds. Now, that's also what I saw initially in that sort of in a very far distance. I saw that there. The thing is and this is where the police cams, the police officers are wearing their own video cameras, and audio will come into play, which so far they haven't released in any form. We might get little excerpts as time goes by. You'll definitely see that in the court of law. And then you'll see that struggle that was going on. Right now, they're not releasing that information, those particular video clips from all the officers had the video and the audio being, run. Like I said, it was activated, meaning they could turn it on or turn it off. In this case, they turned it on. While standing outside the car, Mr. Floyd began saying and repeating that he could not breathe. Now, this is, I'll get back to that in a minute. Anyway, so the defendant went to the passenger side, meaning Derek, and tried to get Mr. Floyd into the car from that side, and Lane and Kay assisted. Now, this is really interesting here. This is really weird. This is really weird. While standing outside the car, Mr. Floyd began saying and repeating that he could not breathe. Now, like I said, they'll have video and audio from the police officers' cams showing this. And if this is the case, that he could not breathe, then why couldn't he breathe while outside of the vehicle? In other words, the defendant, or Derek, has yet to have the leg or knee on his neck while standing outside the car. Standing. So why is he saying that he cannot breathe? And this can very much help out the defense attorney, because all the defense attorney has to say, and as time goes by, I'll explain why this is. I'll show you why. Is that he said standing outside the vehicle without the leg or knee on his neck, he was repeatedly saying he could not breathe. So what is that due to? That's due to his fears, due to his claustrophobia, or whatever have you. More of a psychological situation going on there, rather than an altercation involving physicality, as well as probably some psychological matter coming into the picture, but mainly due to the physicality, meaning the knee or the leg being on the neck. So he was exhibiting repeatedly, and like I said, you'll see it on the video cam, the police video cam audio, that he was repeatedly saying he could not breathe. That line there, believe me, the defense attorney is going to have a field day with. Now that is if, of course, they go through a lot of motions, pre-trial, of course, and if and I'm sure you will be able to, the defense attorney can take that particular line, and if that's allowed into evidence, he's going to have a field day with that line. That was like a freebie to the defense. This is coming from the prosecution. That's why as I was reading this, I'm thinking to myself, maybe they just did this just to quell or to de-escalate the protests and the riots. Maybe that's why they wrote this the way they did. But if anyone knows how to read when I'm reading, anyone with any kind of intelligence will actually figure, logically speaking, that it would actually escalate the riots and protests, because this was really written more so than less so to help out the defense attorney, which is really weird stuff, guys. So anyway, it says the defendant pulled Mr. Floyd out of the passenger side. Now this is another weird thing. Why would Derek? So apparently, then they got George Floyd into the vehicle, but yet the defendant, Derek, actually pulled him out of the vehicle. Huh? And this is where it can very well work against the defense attorney. Why would, if they have him finally in the vehicle, why would they pull him out of the vehicle? What is going on there at that moment? Because that can very well show that Floyd is mad, he's angry, he's disgusted, and he's going to do some bad things to George Floyd. But then as I read on, they flip it around, which helps out the defense attorney again. Really strange things are going on here in regards to this particular complaint. But anyway, and then what it goes on to say, Mr. Floyd went to the ground face down and still handcuffed. Okay. Kay held Mr. Floyd's back, and you could see him lined up there on that other third video that I was able to see. I didn't show it anymore on my channel, Jacob Clear channel, but you could see the two guys here holding the legs and the buttocks down, and then you have Derek holding him down by the neck, and then the other guy walking around the vehicle in the back. So Kay held Mr. Floyd's back, and Lane held his legs, so the back, no, could be the back of his rear end or the back. The defendant placed his left knee in the area of Mr. Floyd's head and neck. Mr. Floyd said, "I can't breathe," multiple times, repeatedly said, "Mama," and "please" as well. The defendant and the other two officers stayed in their positions. Now, this is what's going to nail those other police officers. Instead of saying, wait, all that, they could have said to Derek, okay, all right, enough, let's put him back into the vehicle and leave it at that. But instead, they stayed in their positions. Now, I don't know exactly how that all works when you have more than one police officer on the scene, but I'm sure there's somewhat of a leader there, like a sergeant or some captain, or I don't know how it works, okay? But I'm sure there's someone that can say, by the way, I don't think Derek had a high rank, in other words. So there probably was someone else there that maybe had a high rank that could have stopped the situation, but instead did not. And that's what's going to wind up screwing these other police officers. So they won't do much time in prison, but it's certainly, maybe they'll do 5 years, maybe 7 year, not probably not 7, but probably maybe a couple of years. They could possibly get out on probation. So we pause this. Sorry about that, guys. I was interrupted there. Anyway, so yeah, as I was saying, those 2 officers, because they held them down in place, will get, probably a lesser, there'll be a little bit more lenient on the sentencing, but they're could very well do time in prison or at least be put on probation. They probably will never work as police officers again in their lives. The key that is very interesting, like I said before, is the defendant pulled Mr. Floyd out of the passenger side of the squad car. So apparently they put him in the police car or SWAT car, and then Derek decided to pull him out. Why did he pull him out? That's something that not only will go against Derek or the defense attorney, but it could work very well for the state, for the prosecution. That's something that needs to be spoken to. Like I said, they have the video cam and they have the audio on the police cam, so that'll pick that information up. So I'm sure they're mulling over those particular video and audio there, see what was going on. So continue on. So it says the officer said, and this is, they're holding them down at this point, okay? They're holding George Floyd down against the ground. And the officer said, you are talking fine to Mr. Floyd as he continued to move back and forth. Lane asked, should we roll him on his side? And the defendant said, no, staying put where we got him. Officer Lane said, I'm worried about excited delirium or whatever. The defendant said, that's why we have him on his stomach. None of the 3 officers moved from their positions. So apparently Lane was concerned for George Floyd's condition. He sees that there's some problem going on there. What is it called? I'm sure at that time he's starting to say, I can't breathe and things of that nature. And Elaine is trying to say, well, maybe we should roll him over onto his side. Now, the question there is who's in charge? Is Lane inferior in rank to Derek, or is he not? Now, if he's inferior to Derek in rank, then he's up crap creek, because he has to, if Derek says it, it's basically an order to remain in place. On the other hand, if he is Derek's superior, then why didn't Lane be more forceful and demand that they roll him to his side? So that, of course, what comes out in trial. Then it says the BWC video shows Mr. Floyd continue to move and breathe. So he's still moving around at this time. And then at 8:24:24, Mr. Floyd stopped moving. At 8:25:31, the video appears to show Mr. Floyd ceasing to breathe or speak. Lane said, once roll him on his side. McKay checked Mr. Floyd's right wrist for a pulse and said, I couldn't find one. None of the officers moved from their position. So they still are on him. They're still sitting on him, holding his back down, holding his legs down, and then also holding his neck down. And yet they still, like it says, QAing or whatever, K, couldn't find a pulse, and yet they still left him in that position, which created the whole issue anyway of why he didn't have a pulse. You would think they would have want to roll him over, see what's going on, maybe give mouth to mouth, whatever, resuscitate him or whatever have you. I don't know all about that stuff, medically speaking. But anyway, and then it says at 8:27:24, the defendant removed his knee from Mr. Floyd's neck. An ambulance and emergency medical personnel arrived. The officers placed Mr. Floyd on a gurney, and the ambulance left the scene. Mr. Floyd was pronounced dead at Eton, whatever, County Medical Center sometime later there, about an hour later or so. What I found kind of strange is, why did the ambulance show up all of a sudden? Now, there are times that when there's the police are called or 911 is called, regardless if the police are called, there's either a fire engine shows up and an ambulance shows up at the same time. That could be the reason why. Unless, well, I'm sure it'll come out from the police cam, the audio especially, of maybe someone actually calling a 911, or a good probability that one of the bystanders was either filming it or watching what was going on. They had called 911. I always found that kind of odd that all of a sudden the ambulance shows up. I don't know. Kind of weird. Just a possibility there. And this is really interesting. And this, so far, they don't have the full autopsy, but so far, what they wrote in this paragraph pretty much is for the defendant. It actually helps the defendant out, of the defense attorney. It says a medical examiner conducted Mr. Floyd's autopsy on May 26, 2020. The full report of the medical examiner is pending, but the medical examiner has made the following preliminary findings. These are just until they get more concrete results, of course. So initially it came out as the autopsy revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. So nothing that, that it cut off his airway. That's kind of weird. Mr. Floyd had underlying health conditions, including coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease. The combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in the system likely contributed to his death. Now, this is where the mitigating circumstances fall into play. So, considering he has coronary artery disease, he has hypertensive heart disease, he may have had intoxicants, and that'll come out as they take tests and things of that nature, as well as being restrained by the police, all contributed to the death. This is a preliminary or the initial findings, of course. So what it's saying is, remember up here, we'll get back to that in a second, but if you come up here, this is where it matters at. This is how it works anyway, the process. So the maximum sentence is 25 years here, and the maximum sentence is 10 years here. A total of 35 years, okay? Maybe good behavior, get out in 20, maybe, okay? That is where these particular charges are counts for at, okay? So when you take all this into consideration, all of this, heart disease, and, coronary artery disease, and maybe possibly intoxicants, and combine all that together, it mitigates the circumstances. So even though the maximum penalty is 25 years, the defense attorney can very well argue that there are other contributing factors as to the reason why this guy died. And if that, and as time goes by, the jury, when they deliberate, they will take that in consideration, or they ought to, by law, supposed to take that into consideration. If that is the evidence or the facts during the court trial, and they will decide, well, okay, let's say, let's say hypothetically they found Derek, the defendant, guilty, and then the judge orders them to sentence him. It's one thing to have a conviction, but you still have to be sentenced. You have to be punished, right? So they go back in the jury room and they deliberate about how they're going to sentence him. And then that's where all these health conditions and things kick into place, intoxicants and things of that nature. So the maximum penalty is 25 years, but the jury can very well knock that down to maybe 10 years, or maybe 5 years, or 7 years, or 12 years, or whatever. And then let's say if they knock it down to 10 years, then for good behavior, he possibly can get out for maybe 4 to 6 years in prison. That is Derek, the defendant. And then the other 3 officers probably won't even, possibly not even do any time. And if they do, maybe 6 months to a couple of years. Maybe not even that, maybe a year. I mean, probably, let's say, hypothetically, okay? Let's say, not even so much hypothetical, but let's say probably that even if they're not convicted, okay, none of the officers are convicted, the chances of a captain, I guess it's captain is the highest person within a police station, they normally or either HR or whatever have you, the chances of them hiring them as police officers in the future doesn't completely state that it won't happen, but the probability would be lower, okay? Well, on the other hand, of course, if they get convicted, any of these officers get convicted, then the possibility of getting rehired ever as a police officer is probably 0. Because they're all, well, Derek right now, the defendant, these are felony charges. Now, the 3 other officers, they could do like a gross misdemeanor, but I'm sure it's not going to go that way. It's probably going to be felony charges because they contributed to George Floyd's death on a lower scale, on a minimal scale. So if you take all this into consideration, that paragraph greatly helps out the defense attorney when they actually go into trial. Unless, of course, he pleads guilty, which I'm sure Derek is not going to do that, and I'm sure the other 3 officers won't do that unless they cut a deal. They can cut deals. Of course, and then there's civil trials that will come after that. Wrongful death lawsuits can be filed against Derek and even the other 3 officers. I'm sure the city is going to get sued. The George Floyd's attorney, the main lead attorney they hired was, I'm sure he didn't even hire him. He just does this out of the good of his heart because he knows that the court is going to take care of him as far as his costs and fees are concerned. Ben Crump, C-R-U-M-P, he reminds me of the guy that, what was his name? The guy that got O.J. Simpson off. Very, very intelligent, strategic defense attorney. Well, in this particular case, he can be a defense attorney, but in this particular case, he will wind up suing the city, as well as probably Derek and the other 3 officers in civil suits. And that's where he's going to come into play as time goes by. As time goes by. Okay, they have, of course, up to about 2 years to file these suits. So, and that'll be, the trial, the criminal trial, probably maybe a year and a half. I'm sure Derek's defense attorney is going to probably move that time period out further as far as he can go, especially if Derek, the police officer, is out on bond. Then I'm sure that defense attorney is going to try to move that trial as far as he can into the future. And anytime they're around or thereabouts, that's when Ben Crump actually filed these civil lawsuits. He could certainly help out the prosecution, but usually the state they can handle their own deals. I'm not deals, but their own actions. They can handle the case. But Ben Crump, if he was if he had to, like, it was, the tables were turned around and George Floyd was the defendant, Ben Crump would be the one, someone like him that would come in. Johnny Cochran, I believe his name was Johnny Cochran. And in fact, he was a great defense attorney. I mean, if you understand, I mean, I've always considered O.J. Simpson guilty. That was my own, I watched those live, the criminal trial, watched it live back in 94, 95. I always felt quite, it's not a feeling, but more logically, reasonably, he definitely killed Nicole Brown and the guy, I forgot his name already. Anyway, he definitely killed those two individuals. But still, everyone has a right to a trial, right? So, and everyone's innocent until proven guilty, right? These are the cornerstones of the criminal justice system. And therefore, when Johnny Cochran did what he did, I actually admire, believe it or not, I admire him as a defense attorney because he was highly intelligent and highly strategic, along with FOLLY Bailey. Not so much Robert Shapiro, though he had a hand in it, mainly in the background, in the backdrop. But between FOLLY Bailey and Johnny Cochran, I believe his first name was Johnny. I mean, they pulled off really a great defense. And you have to admire that and respect that as them being defense attorneys looking out for their client, even though morally and even legally, I know that, O.J. Simpson ought to be, well, he should have been hung. Of course, and again, the judge, Hull, I think his name was, let a lot of things in and left a lot of things out, which he shouldn't have, even by law, by their own state laws, because in California at that time, I really followed all this, but he was pressured by the political aspect of it because they didn't want to have a riot, so he had to maneuver himself in a very deliberative manner in order to avoid that from happening. So it was a really, a politically charged type of criminal trial. But still, if you look at it objectively, Johnny Cochran was absolutely brilliant in what he was doing. Well, the same thing with like Ben Crump. He has that same intelligent level and strategic maneuvering around the criminal justice system as well as the civil justice system. So anyway, the Floyd family definitely has an attorney that knows how to win. Nevertheless, like it says in that paragraph, the defense attorney will certainly have a lot of tools to work with, just that one paragraph, let alone what's going to come out when they do the full autopsy. They get all the tests back and make the medical examiner make his judgment and hand that information over to the DA. But still, that's, the 25 25-year maximum can very well be shortened down to like 10 years. Yeah, it depends. That's the scary part about this. And when I read this, it was like I had to do a video and explain this comment because a lot of this really helps the defense. It's crazy. Anyway, so let me go on. So it says the defendant had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in total. 2 minutes and 53 seconds of this was after Mr. Floyd was non-responsive. Police are trained that this type of restraint with a subject in a prone position is inherently dangerous. So they're trained that way. Now, the only way for Derek, the defendant, to get around that is to tell his defense attorney, who's going to help him out, or a defense team, I should say, because it's not going to be just one attorney. But anyway, you'll have a lead defense attorney and then have the associates thereafter. Is that I was distressed, I was emotional, I wasn't thinking, whatever it may be. He might be able to somehow or another mitigate those circumstances. But, you know, like it says, he was trained, police in general, meaning, which includes Derek, they're trained to restrain themselves. It says that this type of restraint with the subject of is inherently dangerous, not restraint. So there is inherently dangerous, meaning that most likely is going to hurt that person. And that's, you want to, like when a police officer arrests you, the best thing to do is don't resist. Let's say if you did resist, then that escalates. And so then the police officer or officers will take other measures to try to de-escalate or stabilize the situation. Well, the more you try to escalate it in any way, then they enforce, or they what's the word for it? I don't know, I'll just do it in these words. They wind up forcing themselves even more on that particular individuals. And that's like a tug of war. In other words, like if George Floyd pulled out a gun, if he had a gun, he didn't, he was unarmed. Let's say if he pulled out a gun, that would have really escalated that situation. In fact, he probably wouldn't have put his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. He would have shot him dead. So that's really where it's at. So when it comes to police, you want to, as just a regular Jane or Joe, you want to think in terms of, instead of the police controlling the situation, that you really control it. In other words, you respect the police officer, you answer all his questions without any hesitation. I don't care what they are, okay? If you have a problem with any of these questions or any of his actions, then you take him to court and you handle it that way. See, a lot of people don't think. But you do whatever they tell you to do. And normally what happens is stabilizes the situation. And if there was any type of escalation there, it ought to de-escalate it. Unless he's like a RoboCop. He's just, he's just going to hurt you anyway. And hopefully you'll survive enough to explain that in a court of law. I don't know any, I've never really heard any cops that just, pull you over, tell you to stand outside of your vehicle and he shoots you right in the head. I've never heard of that. I don't know, I'm 61 years old. I've never read that in a news article or heard about it in any, gossip or rumor or verbal, or to me that would be, like, reminds me of that film called No Country for Old Men. And the guy, he pulls this guy off. I mean, he's not a police officer. He's just some criminal, some idiot. Anyway, and he pulls this guy off the side of the road, and he has this thing, and he just shoots and kills him with this tank thing he has. Puts a nail or whatever through his head. I don't think cops are that bad. Like I said, never heard of a cop do that. But that would be absolutely, you have absolutely no choice. Or like, for instance, no choice or no time to de-escalate that kind of situation, stabilize it. Let's say a cop pulls you over, or let's say a cop comes up to you on a sidewalk and he kicks in your testicles. You know, these things don't go on. You know, there's got to be some kind of friction there going on between the police officer and persons before those types of situations happen. Not that I don't think the police officer will necessarily kick you in the testicles, but he probably push you down on the ground, put you handcuffs. And the more you resist, then they have to have equal force against that. And that's where it begins to escalate. And that's, if you show, like when I saw the first video of George Floyd, and then I saw just a little bit of that first video I saw, and they brought him to the police car across the street, he was agitated. He was resisting. Now, of course, didn't give him the right at all, morally or legally, for Derek to do what he did. Okay, but those kinds of escalations of the situation just makes it harder for the police to contain that situation, and so therefore they're going to react in regards to that. The thing here that like I showing you is Derek, or the defendant, pulled Mr. Floyd out of the passenger side of the squad car. Huh? So he's inside of the squad car, and yet Derek, the police officer, pulls him out. Huh? I mean, these things need to be explained, in, of course, in a court of law, which they will be. But this is, if I read this for what it says, black and white terms, it's basically saying that Mr. Floyd was contained inside of the police car, and for some strange reason, for whatever it may have been, Derek decided to pull him out of the police car, and then they wound up in the situation that they did. I mean, if that is the case, I mean, Derek could very well do, well, you have those other heart disease and all that. So that will wind up escalating that, instead of 25 years, going down to 10 years because of the heart complications and all this stuff on George Floyd's part. Can very well make it go up to like somewhere like 15, 18 years. Why would he do that? What's the point? You had him contained in the police car, but then you decide to pull him out of the police car. I mean, this is like a thing that they gave to the defense attorney on a silver platter. But that will, of course, will be explained in the court of law. And then it says, defendant is in custody. Well, of course he was in custody. Not the best of custody, but he was in custody. He was in custody in the ambulance, yes. I don't know if the police officer was inside the ambulance, but I'm sure, well, probably he didn't really need a police officer in the ambulance because, he was, George Floyd was unconscious at that moment. He's not going to do anything as far as escalating a situation. He's really half dead at that point. And then, of course, you have your signatures and approvals as the special agent that did the complaint. And this is your prosecuting attorney. There'll be not just her, there'll be others, of course, as well, and the whole team they put together. And this is a warrant. They have the summons, a warrant, order of detention, but this is an actual warrant for someone's arrest. Because summons is, they summon you, they give you a time and date, and you appear in whatever particular court they have. A warrant is actual for your arrest. If you don't show up, they're going to apprehend you. And then order of detention is a little bit different. Anyway, and so the bail is $500,000. Now I don't know, if he has that money, Derek, but I'm sure he can gather that once he gets a defense attorney either hired by private funds or he's appointed a defense attorney. I'm sure he's not going to take that avenue. He's going to hire a private attorney, private defense attorney, and probably his family or friends or whoever put the money together to do so. Or the defense attorney can collect in the end from the state. But normally they need some kind of a retainer. And, that could be a retainer for a criminal trial, especially of this magnitude. Man, that's got at least $100,000. That's in the least of it. I mean, that's on the low end. So, yeah, and that's that. And then you have to come up with $500,000 bail. I mean, that's at least your house. I don't know how many properties he owns or his family owns or whatever. And then this goes before is issued by the undersigned. So then the judge is signing off on this complaint. It was signed off on the 29th. And that's pretty much it. And then they give you a little bit of, they didn't fill in too much, kind of strange, but anyway, they didn't fill any of that in. Maybe they don't have it on. It's funny thing is the fingerprint match to criminal history record, no. So he's never had a criminal record. That is Derek, defendant. He's never had a criminal record. He's had charges filed against him in the past for disciplinary reasons and complaints and things of that nature, but no one ever criminally charged him with anything. So that's good. That helps him to a degree. Might mitigate maybe 6 months off the sentence, maybe. And then they got his fingerprints. Well, they're going to get the fingerprints by statute. They have to have that alcohol concentration, and then they just, reiterate what they were saying before. And that's that. Now, what's going to happen is three things. One thing, they've yet to file complaints against each. There's three other police officers. They've yet to do that. They've yet to get the full report from the medical examiner. And then they may also even amend or up, so to speak. That is, they can charge Derek, the main defendant, with even more criminal statute violations. So that could very well happen in the future or whenever, pretty much. That could happen almost at any time, actually, as soon as that type of evidence rises to that level. So the main thing is on this channel, it's the only channel I'm going to put things up on in regards to this. Hopefully, and I should be able to because it's public record. Some things they might redact, but for the most part, it's public record. I'm going to try to get when it comes out, that is, I don't know when. I'd like to get the full autopsy report, and then I'll speak to that, because that'd be rather interesting. I didn't even get to really the preliminary report. I could get that, but I don't care so much for that. I care for the full autopsy report, because then everything is broken down. Medically, I won't understand some things, but we'll get the gist of it. And then any complaints with the other officers I may do, may not do. It depends on how egregious they are. And then if there's other charges added, I will definitely address that. In regards to Derek, I will definitely address that in a separate video. So this will have, ongoing, might be like part 1, part 2, part 3, it turned into a little series. So it's rather interesting because, like I said on the Jacob Clear channel, I've never ever spoken against a police officer because there's always mitigating circumstances. But in a case like this, even though there are mitigating circumstances, as just a layman looking at what I saw in that one particular clip, I mean, that's just unimaginable that you could do that to someone Like, I only saw the clip for like 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but according to this complaint, criminal complaint, it's actually 8 minutes and 46 seconds he held him down in that position. That is just very alarming. Like, that's the only thing I saw during the trial, yeah, I definitely convict him and put him away for quite a while. But now we see this other circumstances being added to the picture. And I probably will still, like if I was in the criminal jury, I would probably still find him guilty. But probably if the judge gave the jury the instruction to sentence the guy, I would. So far, with all this information I've just showed you in this video, yeah, I probably put him away in state prison, but probably on a much lesser charge, not lesser sentence. Like instead of 25 years, I give him maybe 7 years around in there. So it depends as time goes by as to what more facts or evidence that comes out. So we'll see what happens. I'll keep you up to date on this. This is rather interesting because this is like a turning event for me personally, because I said I never spoke against a police officer ever in my life. And this is the first time I ever have. But nevertheless, I'm considering that there are mitigating circumstances outside of just that film that we saw and the words we heard, that there's another side to the situation. That's why they always say, you're innocent until proven guilty. Now, as far as I'm concerned, on the extreme side, I think this guy's definitely guilty. But how guilty is he? Does he deserve 25 years? Or does he deserve only 5 to 7 years? So that depends on those contributing factors. And as time goes by, we'll see how things develop. And eventually they'll have a trial, and I'll even try to get transcripts and stuff of that nature, and continue on with the parts to this particular video series. I would have loved to have had a YouTube channel in 1994 and 95 on O.J. Simpson, because that would have been a great series to do. Because wow, O.J. Simpson was a mess. He was a great football player. I mean, extraordinary in his day, especially. But he was a jealous, angry man, and eventually it turned bad for him. Of course, he got off, was acquitted, but then years later, they were just waiting. They were just waiting for him to screw up, and he screwed up. And he wound up in prison for something else. When I followed a little bit of that, the irony of that particular trial was that he oughtn't really have been given so much time. That whole Las Vegas thing that he did there, he shouldn't have been given so much time, but because it was sort of a revenge against him, that's why he wound up doing the time he did. And then when he got out, just in the last couple of years or so, he started some other mishmash stuff, but not to the point that they put him back in prison. I wish they had found him guilty back in 94, 95. He should have hung, actually. He was, wow, that's amazing. And they never did find the knife. The knife was given to one of the attorneys, is what happened there. And whatever the attorney did, the attorney that has the knife, or had the knife, was not, probably was in the process of representing O.J. Simpson, but the moment that he got the knife, he could not represent him. There's a very thin line there, but I'm sure that's probably where that knife went to. It went to an attorney. Of course, they're supposed to submit that as evidence, but who knows? Maybe the attorney gave that knife to someone else, and that person gave it to someone else. But yeah, they never found the knife ever. It's wild stuff. Anyway, it reminds me of like Robert Blake, another character. He said when he was leaving a restaurant with his girlfriend, and this is really over a child custody dispute, really, what was going on there anyway. But so he left the restaurant with his girlfriend, and then they went into the parking lot, and Robert Blake stated that, well, he left her there because he had to go into the restaurant to get his gun. He forgot his gun in the restaurant. And when he came outside, she was shot. She was already dead. Huh? And the jury actually bought that. I mean, just logically, And you can see he definitely had animosity toward this woman, and he wanted full custody of the child, which she was not willing to give him. Well, he killed her. Stuff like this, So anyway, it's bizarre, but he was able to get off, Either through, fame, wow, you're on the jury and you're looking at Robert Blake, and really a combination of two things, and a good defense team. And that's what he got. He was able to definitely afford that. And so they acquitted him, and he wound up with full custody of this child. Never heard anything from him since, because that's really all that he wanted. Anyway, take a vape and get out of here. Well, I know this is tedious, went on for about 2 hours, but this is a rather interesting case here, and there's a lot of things going on, more so than that 2.5 minute film that I showed on the Jacob Clare channel. Like I said, as a layman looking at that film alone, yeah, definitely Derek is definitely guilty and should be, good 10 to 20 years. But then there's other circumstances or other mitigating factors that are involved. And these are the things that contribute to George Floyd's death, but to what degree? So it's a question of going through to the trial, preliminary, of course, and then you go to the trial. And then at the jury, with all the law, the judge will instruct them on the law, and then they take the facts of the evidence, they put it together, and hopefully they're impartial, and they come back with a verdict of either guilty or acquittal. And that's how that works out. It doesn't really matter what you and I think, really, unless you sit on that jury. And they may because it's a very, very serious situation going on here in the overall, they'll probably sequester that jury. I'm sure they're going to do that, probably. Maybe not at first, but eventually they will. But I'm going to say that they're probably going to sequester the jury. So no one knows what the jury is really thinking. Hopefully they get an impartial jury. See what happens. That's, believe it or not, that has a lot to do with it. If you get a partial jury, then the justice is never served, because whoever sits on that jury pretty much usually with that kind of any kind of bias. It doesn't necessarily have to be a racial bias. It could be any kind of bias. If you have a bias that's relevant to the case that you're hearing in that court of law, you're sitting there. You don't hear hardly any evidence unless that evidence suits your agenda in accordance with your bias. And so when you go into that jury room, you already made up your mind without even deliberating with the other jurors as to what the evidence is. Hopefully, that jury is not made up of one or more, or the extreme that there's all 12 jurors who are biased. That was, normally doesn't happen, but maybe the old South, maybe at one time, maybe, or certain other situations, around the world. But normally you only have maybe one or two that may be biased, but normally they filter that out so they don't wind up with a jury. Hopefully that's the case in this case. Anyway, I'm gonna let you guys go. Enough of me talking. Anyone that's interested, maybe Tommy or someone like him might be interested in listening to this and intellectually contemplate it and think about it and make your own decision or decisions as time goes by, as to what's going on here in this particular case. Anyway, I'm gonna let you guys go. Let's have a good one. Bye-bye.